Hello and welcome to Always Bored, Never Boring. Obviously on the channel I review and paint a lot of miniatures. It's very uncommon a month goes by when I don't end up unboxing or assembling something new. As a result, you will often hear me talking about why I like or dislike a particular sculpt, and I thought it might be fun to spend a few moments focusing on this subject in more detail because, well, why not? Of course, art is subjective. What I look for in a miniature isn't necessarily what someone else will look for. One person's trash is another's treasure, as the saying goes. But for me, there are clear things I look for and things I try to avoid. I have to be honest, while I still consider Games Workshop to be at the very top of the game, and I will always admire the skill and quality of their work, I don't like a lot of their modern miniatures. A lot of them embody everything I personally dislike in a miniature. They seem thin, there is often no sense of weight to them. They are spindly with floaty bits and spiky bits protruding in all directions. They are so fiddly, and that often makes them a pain to assemble, never mind paint, and I find it confuses the eye. Sometimes I look at a miniature and I can't immediately read it. What is it doing? What story is the miniature conveying? Sometimes I feel that Games Workshop substitutes character for more stuff, just adding more and more detail without real care or restraint, just to prove how good they are at what they do. But classic Games Workshop, Oldhammer, now that is where my heart lies. Those beautiful old chunks of metal. And there are some modern companies that make miniatures that speak to me in the same way. Goblin King Games, Midland Miniatures, Archon Studio, Steamforged Games, Northumbrian Tin Soldier, Oathsworn Miniatures, and many more. If I had to distill my wish list for good miniature design down to the basics, I would say there are three main things I look for, and as I am talking, you will see some examples of miniatures from my own collection that reflect those things. 1. I want my miniatures to be clean. I don't want a lot of fussiness. I want detail, not clutter. I am very fond of simple elegance, without a lot of negative space, so I can get things painted quickly and easily. 2. I like my miniatures to have a sense of motion, or a sense of stillness if that's more fitting to the story it tells, a sense of dynamic energy or energy in potential, which makes the character feel real. I like strong poses with through lines that guide your eye around the miniature and create striking forms that have an aesthetically appealing quality. And 3, most importantly, I want my miniatures to have character. I want every one to tell a little story. You should be able to look at the miniature and imagine where that character has come from and what they are doing next. If you can instantly picture the character in a scene, the sculptor has done their job perfectly. Let's talk through a few examples. Here is the Mortician from Moonstone, which I painted on the channel recently, and it was actually painting the Mortician that gave me the idea for this video. This is a very still and composed miniature. The Mortician is a sinister old goblin with an unnatural kinship with the dead, and all of that is baked into the design. The grim tools hanging from the belt, the headlamp to get a better view of his work, the meat cleaver, and a large hooked nose that evokes imagery of witches and that uncanny connection with death. The utter stillness of the pose is creepy. The Mortician has a cane, but he is not really using it to support himself. It just shapes his left hand into a crooked claw. There is a poised strength in his stiff, upright pose. You can imagine him standing in the shadows of a graveyard, as motionless as a tombstone. The movement in the miniature comes from his crow companion, with fluttering outstretched wings, like a black spirit accompanying the Mortician on dark paths few would dare to tread. I perched the bird on a drooping willow, which is not part of the miniature, but something which I felt complemented the miniature's narrative. This is a character shrouded in sorrow, clacking through the stone halls of the mortuary or fog-shrouded streets, his cane on the cobblestones a monotonous omen of death. While Moonstone does not shy away from the unsettling themes and the horror that bubbles beneath the glossy veneer of all good fairy tales, it is known for its whimsical nature, and many of the miniatures are packed with humour. I had dozens of options to illustrate this, but I have settled on the mischievous powder monkey, which likes to hang out with my goblin pirates. It's such a fun miniature. It has a lovely open pose so it can be painted easily, and it has this fantastic diagonal through line from the top right arm leading all the way through to the fizzling bomb that is about to be a big problem for someone. His little face is a picture, with the gaping grin and one eye closed as he lines up his shot. And there is, of course, a bottle of booze swinging from his belt, because why wouldn't there be? There is very little fussiness, but every detail feels important and relevant. Every little nuance adds to the overall picture and builds a character. You have a foundation to work from before you even apply a base coat of paint. As with the Mortician, I added some scenic details to the base. I used an old signpost from my bits box, as I felt the sturdy upright post counterbalanced the monkey's drunken wobbling. I also added a stone for some additional interest and some support for the monkey's ankle. Moonstone miniatures are made of resin, but next we have some classic metal miniatures from my Oldhammer stash. I love metal miniatures. There is something about the weight of them, the chunkiness. I find that very appealing. This first one is a gladiator who has died countless times as a character from the Heroes expansion for my favourite game of all time, Dungeon Quest. This, to me, is a perfect example of a clean, unfussy miniature that manages to convey so much character despite its simplicity. Just look at his pose, shifting his weight onto his right foot, hefting his mace. And the expression. Not a face of anger, not a face of a man about to charge into battle. That is the face of a man who has decided he doesn't like your face and wants to rearrange some of the details, and he's going to do it without breaking a sweat. And while there aren't many details, the ones that are there add humour to the character. The unsightly thong and the boil on the bum. It's a masterclass in understated characterization. This gladiator isn't the only Oldhammer bad boy looking for a dust-up. How could I make a video about beautiful miniatures without including one of the best miniatures ever made? It's Slambo. This is perfection in miniature. The wide open pose is easy to paint, but it also tells you everything you need to know about Slambo. He isn't afraid of anything or anyone. He is saying come and have a go if you think you're hard enough. And his clean undecorated armour makes it clear he doesn't need to show off. He doesn't need to display trophies. He doesn't need ornate details to look impressive. He just is. The lack of specific detailing, combined with the pose, not only makes it an easy miniature to paint, especially if you use the super cheaty method that I used in my painting video for this guy, but it also keeps Slambo mysterious, and that adds to the sense of danger. Who is this guy challenging you with two axes, his face concealed behind a featureless mask? Before we head out of this dungeon, there is just one more miniature to see, the stunning Rat Ogre. It embodies all the good stuff, uncluttered with a wide open stance and details that speak of a backstory. Those shackles on the ankles tell a tale, and the way he is using the chains from the manacles as knuckle dusters is just superb. This is an imprisoned creature using every ounce of the rage it feels when it's finally unleashed on unwary heroes. I also have some gothic Oldhammer stuff in my collection, and I just had to show you the Gumshoe, who comes from the Curse of the Mummy's Tomb board game. One glance at this character, in his trenchcoat and fedora, sporting a very Bogart nose and jaw, and you know all you need to know. This is a world-weary detective who has seen enough to be on his guard, but has also seen enough to take it all in his stride. His gun is drawn, but his left hand is still in his pocket. Nothing surprises him. Oh, and by the way, I know his belt shouldn't be grey. I did that on purpose just to break up the large blocks of brown on the miniature. We're moving away from Oldhammer now, but we are still looking at old metal miniatures. This next one is Tsubasa Kurakami from Anima Tactics, a long discontinued game that I still enjoy, and which I have reviewed on the channel previously. I think the hair on this miniature does show one of the limitations of metal miniatures. Modern techniques and materials would result in something that looks a bit more natural. But I don't think that ruins the piece, which is beautifully posed, packed with kinetic energy. I love the flowing fabric, and the way he is stepping forward and drawing his sword is stunning. You can see the shapes of his knees through his clothing, and your mind draws the rest of the form. It's instantly understandable, and there is a real sense of dynamic motion. Conversely, Sister Evangeline is poised and perfectly calm. The movement in her miniature comes not from her, but from an environment we have to imagine for her, where her robes and hair are caught in the wind as she focuses on creating a bird out of pure light. This simple pose is an excellent example of beautiful character-driven storytelling. She is calm and composed, unaware of her surroundings, focused on her job, totally in control. You might notice that when I painted her, I used a small amount of purple for the clothing hidden by her outer garments. This was just me playing with the idea that outside she is this white-clad priestess, but inside she has a darker power that she can tap into. Our next metal miniature is from Oathsworn Miniatures for the Burrows Badgers skirmish game. I do like anthropomorphic animals, and Oathsworn makes some of the best. This Scrawl Mage is absolutely gorgeous, and this also happens to be one of my favourite paint jobs. What really sells this miniature is the posing. It's so strong. You have this clean horizontal line formed by the tail and the leading arm, bisected by the upright body and staff. But then that upright has been tilted 45 degrees forwards, giving everything a sense of momentum. Combined with the Scrawl's expression, you get a good idea of the concentration and effort she is using. It's just lovely, and everything has a pleasing balance. Bringing us more up to date now, we have a Stalagbite from Midland Miniatures. I have such a soft spot for these guys because they are such simple designs and yet they capture so much with so little. It's just a stalagmite with an eye, some tusks and some toes, but the simplicity works in its favour. This is an ambush predator. It lurks in the dark among the rocky outcrops, waiting for its time to strike. Then that one eye opens. It took just a few minutes to paint, and I think the end result shows that miniatures can be incredibly minimalistic, but if you get the basics right, you can end up with something very special. To finish up, I am moving away from metal miniatures to take a look at a couple of plastic miniatures that needed to be assembled from sprues. Of course, it's some of the range of He-Man miniatures from Archon Studio. These are some of my very favourite modern miniatures, although admittedly they do get the benefit of a healthy dose of bias because I love Masters of the Universe so much. This first one is Teela, obviously. I think this is one of the best in the range because I think the form is so perfect. It has this really strong diagonal line, helped by the downward angle of the staff. But the pose is really clever because it has a twist in it. If you look at the forward left leg, the foot is turned inwards, while the trailing right leg is turned in the opposite direction. It captures a moment where Teela is changing direction, diverting the attention of her initial charge. I haven't seen that too often in miniatures, and it's very well done. And no, I'm not going to talk about He-Man without showcasing the man himself. This is probably my favourite paint job ever, because I was really trying to do this piece justice. I love it. I think it captures He-Man's character perfectly. The pose is strong, the feet braced, mouth open as he calls on the power of Grayskull. I think if you are making miniatures based on an IP, it's important to capture the personalities of the characters accurately, and Archon have definitely done that here. Alas, while I could talk about miniatures I love all day, and there are many more examples I could share, we are reaching the end of this little tour. But I couldn't go without showing one more miniature. This stunning resin unicorn from the Harry Potter miniature game by Knight Models. I am sure I don't need to elaborate on why I like this miniature so much. But that is it from me for now. Please share what makes a good miniature for you in the comments below. There are no wrong answers. And as always, if you like the video, please consider pressing the like button. If you really like the video, please consider subscribing if you don't already do so. And hopefully, I will see you all again very soon. Bye bye everyone. Bye bye.